For we do not think that we know a thing until we are acquainted with its primary conditions or first principles. On December 11th, 2023, I investigated my personal beliefs, biases, and morals. Through a back and forth internal dialogue, I challenged and adapted my beliefs and created a list of ethics to live by. To begin my experiment, I began from a hypothetical moral code. Within this code, I believe the concepts that cooperation is a good thing, making something new is a good thing, repurposing something that was old is a good thing, it's good to tell the truth and it's bad to lie, harming others is bad but not indefensible, stealing is bad, forgiveness is good but not an obligation, necessary authority is a good thing, and unnecessary bureaucracy is a bad thing. In order to catch where my personal experience is illegitimately informing my moral code, I wanted to present my personal biases. I would like to be a moral individual. I want to be effective at what I do. I want to be well received by those who are viewing me. I dislike bureaucracy. I dislike bullying, and I would like to have children. All of these inform my personal beliefs. Each line of argument in my internal dialogue relies on the axiomatic beliefs that people will act in their own self-interest and that people are incapable of perfection. For each individual moral belief that I hypothetically established, I started by presenting my argument on the basis of no internal dialogue whatsoever, just why I thought that that is a moral good. And then, in order to get to a deeper understanding of my beliefs, I start by rebutting it. Now, the rebuttal sometimes plays devil's advocate, but all the same, I do believe that it is a valid argument. And often, it is my own personal beliefs, and the rebuttal lines up more closely with how I truly feel than the counter does. So it's this back and forth with rebuttal and then counter and rebuttal and counter until eventually I come to an agreement within myself. Why is it good to cooperate with others? It's clear that cooperation is effective. Any group that is properly aligned along a similar goal is greater than the sum of its parts. By yourself, you can only accomplish a set amount of things, but with the cooperation of others, you guys can achieve much more than you would have been able to alone. But just because it's effective does not mean that it is a moral good. It is possible to cooperate in order to do bad. I initially was still hesitant to throw away the idea that cooperation was a good thing in and of itself, because so long as at least one of the parties involved is aiming to do good, it is possible for them to glean information from the other side, even if the other side is aiming to do bad. Given the example of serial killers and detectives. A serial killer might cooperate with a detective, and the serial killer is getting off on telling their story of how they murdered and hurt people. But the detective is learning information that they'll be able to apply to protect other people in the future. This being said, it is necessary that at least one of the parties is aiming to do good. On the other hand, gang violence is an example where a group of people will come together to do harm to a community in order to prop themselves up. All parties involved are cooperating, but they are doing bad. It's a net negative and a moral ill. For this reason, it's very important to cooperate and to collaborate in terms of politics, in terms of community and moral ethics. It's very important to work with people who have shared interests to you. But cooperation is not a moral good in and of itself. Why is it bad to harm others? I started from the belief that harm is bad unless you are able to grow from it. It could be possible that you get fired from your job because you were lazy and couldn't show up to work on time, but then you're able to turn that around and become a person who's very on top of their schedule, and you grow from that situation. My initial line of rebuttal was that harming someone for your own personal benefit at their expense will serve you. It won't serve the other person, but it will certainly make your world better. To counter this, I leaned into the golden rule. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. If you don't want someone to harm you for their own personal benefit, it's important that you also don't harm them for your own personal benefit. They're a person just as much as you are. You have to assume that everyone's acting in their own self-interest. So unless we play by a shared rules and a set moral code that you can't do this to other people, then everyone will be happy to do it to you as well. This gets a little more complicated in society when we're talking about large groups benefiting from the expense of other larger groups. In the case where a small minority of people excel due to the suffering of many others, for example, the South African apartheid, it's clear that this is immoral, because the suffering of so many more people could not possibly be justifying the benefit of so few people. But in the case where there's many people excelling and a smaller group suffering, it's not as clear morally. In my counter to this point, I 100% agree that some pursuits have desirable outcomes that may necessitate the harming of others. The trolley problem is a great example of this. If 5 people are laying on one set of train tracks and one person is laying on another set of train tracks, assuming nothing about the people as individuals, one person dying would be better than 5 people dying. Murder may be wrong, but choosing to kill the one person versus choosing to kill the 5 people is a moral pursuit, and it is justifiable. The caveat that I add here is that it is absolutely crucial that mitigation of the harm needs to be of utmost priority, and that exploitation needs to be removed from the process wherever possible. I then further establish that harm isn't always known to the parties involved. It's possible to indirectly cause harm, but it is beholden on the person enacting the process to search for that harm and to mitigate it to the best of their ability. For example, pollution, in the short term, served to benefit the capitalists who did not look for the long-term harm that they were causing. However, the harm that they've caused has largely become irreversible and something that we're just going to have to live with in modern society. Therefore, ignorance can only be a valid excuse in causing harm and exploitation if the party who is doing the harm is actively searching to the best of their ability in order to find said harm and mitigate it. And those who are potentially causing the most harm have a higher duty to search for that harm. A person driving their car is less obligated to be aware of the effects that they're having on the environment than the car manufacturer itself. Why is it good to create something? I started from the idea that if something is created, it had not existed beforehand, and now it has the potential to serve humanity, where it did not before. This is what makes it good. Obviously, the initial counter would be, what if that creation harms humanity? Now, I believe that as a society, we have to make these judgments as to whether or not this is a harmful creation and if it can be allowed in our society. But if the creation is harmful, we can throw it away, and if it's not harmful, it will benefit us. So the net positive far outweighs the net negative. I then pose the rebuttal that a moral system dependent on laws is not just, that the principles need to inform the laws and not the other way around. The implication being that if what makes creation good is that this law is in place that makes it good, then the underlying moral ethic would be that harming others is bad, because that's what's underlying the information that makes creation a good thing. However, to counter this, on a planet by yourself with no one around, it would be good to create something new. You then, as established at the beginning, would have something that was not had before. If it's harmful to you, you can throw it away and never use it again. And if it's beneficial to you, then you can exploit it and use it and take advantage of it. The laws are necessary to protect people in society, but creating things are still good, absent of society altogether. Now, eventually, what I come to the understanding of assumes that people are going to act in their own self-interest, which is that if the creator has an intention behind what they create, and it no longer is serving that intention because they have unintentionally made something that harms it rather than helps, one would assume that said creator would happily throw it away or adapt to make it better suit the needs. Laws are going to protect us from bad creations, and people will always be interested in making something that's useful and something that will serve the interest of humanity. So creation's definitely a good thing. Now, creating something new is good, but what about repurposing something that was old? I start from the assumption that when you repurpose something, it was largely irrelevant and out of practice. So this might be an invention that was no longer used This might be a dance that people lost interest in, but now has a new flair. Regardless, whatever has been repurposed is now being used and wasn't being used before. Baked into this conversation, I'm assuming all of the arguments that were made about creating something new, where it could be harmful, but society can dictate what is harmful and what is not harmful and protect the individual, that it's good to make something new, even if it's bad, because it can be thrown away. So my real rebuttal when it comes to repurposing something starts from the idea that if something old has become irrelevant, wouldn't it be better for society if one were to create something new rather than to repurpose the old thing? This comes from the idea that you will gain more information from a new creation, a larger body of information, than if you were to repurpose something old, where you would only come up with new efficiencies or new angles. But the conclusion that I draw is that due to the fact that creation and information are not zero-sum games, one person can invent a light bulb on one side of the world, and one person can invent a light bulb on another side of the world, and they can still both be used. They can be different models of those light bulbs, and it doesn't take away from the other invention. The same is true of the knowledge that would be gained from the new invention versus the knowledge that would be gained from reinventing something that was old. There is a certain value that comes with establishing new efficiencies and new methods of using old information that does not take away from the body of information that would have been discovered said a new invention were to come out. So repurposing something that was old is clearly a good thing. Why is it good to tell the truth and bad to lie? I start from the concept that truth is reality. Truth is when your speech is oriented with reality, and it is useful for everyone involved when communicating to orient your communication along with the truth. It makes things easier, it helps you understand each other, and it builds a certain amount of trust. Truth is only one letter different than trust. Now, my rebuttal is that lies are sometimes acceptable because a truthful statement might harm someone. I'm hesitant to accept this because harm can come from the trust that's lost when a party realizes that they were lied to in the past. However, it's possible to trust that someone has your best interest in mind without trusting that they tell you the truth 100% of the time. There is a line for each human where telling the truth and accepting lies is acceptable. If you step past this line, you will no longer be a trustworthy person to that individual. Therefore, it's better to play it safe and to just never lie, because you don't know where that line is for that person. The rebuttal that I pose, though, is that humans are complex, but we are capable of discerning to a degree around where that line falls with certain people. Not everyone's going to be as good at finding the line, and not everyone's going to have the same line, but it is possible to discern where the line is, and we do stand to benefit from certain lies. So, in conclusion, it's almost always better to tell the truth, except in certain cases where both parties stand to benefit from a lie. An example might be telling your wife that she looks beautiful, even if she looks like she's been putting on a couple pounds and maybe needs to pluck some mole hairs. But the lying party is the one who needs to practice caution because the burden is on them to keep the trust between the parties. The burden is on them to make sure that it's healthy for both parties involved. Furthermore, lies become more acceptable when both parties stand to greatly benefit than when both parties stand to minimally benefit. Why is it wrong to steal? As we established earlier, causing harm to others for personal gain is bad. It's only justifiable in certain cases. And stealing is bad because it harms the party that's being stolen from. I start from the rebuttal that if the stolen from party is unaware of the theft and they will never become aware of the theft, that are they really being harmed? And although it's true that the individual will not experience personal harm, there is a harm to the social fabric that is caused by said exploitation of others. But I challenge, if no one was even aware that the crime was committed, how would that damage the social fabric? The only person who is aware would be the person who's stealing. This case is kind of similar to lying, where it's very important to establish trust between individuals, and lying deteriorates the trust between parties, and stealing deteriorates the trust between parties. But lying can be justifiable in some cases because it could benefit both parties involved. However, theft will never benefit the party that's being stolen from. It can only benefit the party that is doing the stealing. Although both parties may not be aware of a crime, the person who's doing the stealing will then sow the seeds of doubt that their neighbors might also do the same to them, and this undermines the social fabric indirectly. There are cases, however, where stealing is justified. These would be cases of necessity, where an individual's human needs are not being met. Needs like food, water, shelter, clothing. If these basic human needs have not been met, it should be justifiable for them to steal. However, they can do so in a moral way, and they can do so in an immoral way. Morally, one must steal from someone who has the means after the theft. If you take the clothing off of someone's back and they no longer have clothes themselves, this was an immoral stealing. If you take clothes from a Walmart because you don't have any clothes, there's no one who's going to be left without their human needs being met. Now, this is a justifiable theft, but it is not a moral good to do the stealing. And said theft still underlies the social fabric of society, so it is a net negative if people are to steal. Therefore, it is important that as a society we provide for the basic human needs of all humans living in society. If someone living on the streets does not have clean drinking water, does not have food, does not have clothing or shelter, we need, as a society, to provide for this individual to ensure that those basic human needs have been met. This will disincentivize theft and cause a greater social fabric among society. Why is forgiveness a good thing? I grew up with Christian beliefs, although I'm not practicing at this current point in my life, so I do bring a lot of the cultural beliefs of Christianity with me. I personally am very fond of forgiveness. I think it's really important in the relationships between individuals to be able to forgive and move past wrongdoings, hurt, mistakes. Christians value forgiveness above almost all other concepts in human relations. Forgiveness is what Jesus did when he died on the cross. It's what God did when he sent his son to die for the sins of humanity. Therefore, Christianity, which is all about the teachings of Jesus, and values the crucifixion as the most important event in all of mankind, values forgiveness very highly. I was hesitant that maybe my personal biases might be informing such the strong feelings that I have about forgiveness. But nonetheless, I started from the idea that humans are incapable of perfection, this axiomatic belief that I hold. No human will do right 100% of the time. No human is Jesus Christ. If society is capable of forgiveness, then we stand to benefit from the input that each individual is able to provide. I start with the rebuttal that no one expects perfection, and no one asks for forgiveness because another person wasn't perfect. Forgiveness is only a necessary thing in the cases in which harm has been caused that has been determined to be unacceptable harm. Now, although one is not expected or obligated to forgive anyone for harm that's been caused to them, they do stand to benefit. When one forgives another person, they no longer hold on to the feelings of anger or resentment that they might have experienced from the harm that was caused to them. Forgiveness is the first step in healing. But on a societal level, it's important that we're able to forgive and rehabilitate individuals so that they can again positively contribute to society. But is there a line in which someone is no longer worthy of forgiveness? On the personal level, no one is worthy of forgiveness. Once you've wronged someone, it's up to them to decide whether or not they can forgive you for that action. But both parties do stand to benefit from the forgiveness. They might be able to patch up their relationship and have a healthy relationship going forward. They might be able to heal from the harm that was caused to them and to thrive in their future, not being burdened by the harm. And also, if a victim is able to forgive a perpetrator, the perpetrator might also then be able to forgive themselves. On a societal level, forgiveness is not due to those who won't show remorse for their actions. If one is unwilling to change, then they are unworthy of forgiveness. I am hesitant to draw that line and to think that any human is able to draw that line. There's obviously examples in which it's clear. For example, a murderer who laughs at their victim's family in court is probably unwilling to change. At least in that moment, they show no remorse. Down the line, they may be sociopathic and hiding the fact that they show no remorse, while outwardly showing great remorse and begging for forgiveness. I err on the side of caution to protect the freedoms of individuals, that we should be hesitant to enact things like the death penalty, because I'm not confident that a human being is capable of saying that someone is unable to change. If this individual is able to change, I think that society has the interest of rehabilitating them, no matter how heinous their crime was. Furthermore, people are capable of doing good for society while in prison. So just killing them doesn't serve to benefit anyone, aside from maybe satiating the revenge of the people who they victimized. A further rebuttal resides in the ambiguity of where forgiveness is needed and where actions should simply be accepted, despite being unwanted. Societally, there are certain actions that are taboo and gauche and shouldn't be penalized by law, but are largely unaccepted. These actions do not need to be forgiven because they are unpunishable. But in regards to personal relations, this question lies more about where someone needs to apologize for their actions. And that line is where the offending party grossly missteps the boundaries of the relationship. If a friend is aware that you are uncomfortable when you joke about their body weight, but they continue to do so, an apology should be expected. However, if you joke about your own body weight and the friend chimes in, not knowing that you're uncomfortable with it, they probably don't owe you an apology. Now, a good friend might apologize if you bring it to their attention that it does make you uncomfortable. However, it shouldn't be expected of them. Boundaries are also a back and forth dialogue between people in any relationship, so it is possible to slightly encroach on the boundaries of a person so long as you are willing to change and adapt your behavior to meet the boundaries when informed that you have crossed them. Aside from where forgiveness is acceptable and where forgiveness is necessary, sometimes forgiving someone who has done wrong will enable them to continue doing wrong in the future. But I would posit that the forgiveness is not what has enabled them, but rather the lack of consequences for their actions. You can forgive someone and still keep them at a distance. You can forgive someone for stealing from you, but decide to never involve them in your life forever. The forgiveness will still benefit both parties involved, but there is no need for both parties to come together and repair the relationship. But as a final rebuttal, if one is too quick to forgive and forget and move on when they've been taken advantage of, they're going to be walked on and they're going to be taken advantage of by others. This individual is responsible for protecting themselves. They need to learn from this experience in which they were harmed, and they need to change their behavior so that they're not harmed in the future. It's one thing to get walked on in a relationship and to cut that person out of your life. It's another thing to get walked on, cut that person out of your life, make no changes to your own personal life, and then get walked on by someone else. The forgiveness is not what causes the harm to this individual. It's the failure to establish their own personal boundaries in relationships. Forgiveness is 100% a moral good on a personal and a societal level. Why is authority a good thing? When I wrote this clause initially in my hypothetical, I made the caveat that necessary authority was a good thing. Police forces are good when they protect the people, and stop people who do bad. Police forces are bad when they protect the ruling class and exploit those that are subservient to them. Similar to cooperation, authority is very effective. A leader of a project is better able to manage those subject to their authority than each individual leading themselves. An agreed upon authority is the most effective way to cooperate. Authority figures are always people, and people are not perfect. So, the authority is always going to make mistakes, and those who submit to the authority will always be harmed, given enough time. This is why individuals in positions of authority need to be held to a level of criticism. Democratic elections, checks and balances between authority figures, and consistent sets of legal rules that apply to everyone, authority or not, are absolutely essential to maintaining just authority. That being said, because people will serve their own self-interests, people are capable of being bribed. They're capable of making policy decisions that benefit their own personal gain and not society at large. And even unconsciously, people are capable of making decisions that benefit themselves, unintending to do so. To counter, it is true that there is no perfect check to human misconduct. People will always be susceptible to bribery. People will always be susceptible to acting in their own self-interest to the detriment of society. But we do need authority as a society in order to uphold the social fabric. If there is no agreed upon set of rules that people must live by and an authority figure to enforce them, then the social fabric will fall apart. So eventually, similar to cooperation, I come to the understanding that authority in and of itself is not a moral good, but it is effective and it is absolutely necessary as a society for upholding the social fabric, which is a moral good. When the social fabric stands to protect individuals and stands to maximize the well-being of individuals, then upholding said social fabric is good and authority is necessary in upholding it. It's very important that we submit to authority in order to benefit the other foundational moral beliefs that we have as a group. On the other side of the coin, why is bureaucracy a bad thing? As I said earlier, I have a personal distaste for bureaucracy. This stems from a couple years that I worked at a very large corporation in which I experienced on a day-to-day basis interactions with customers that were unnatural and unhelpful to everyone involved. The manager and the manager's managers and the manager's manager's managers all agreed that certain policies were unhelpful and would harm our interaction with customers. We would put up predatory marketing things that were sent to us from corporate that we didn't agree with and didn't want to put up. But if the regional manager happened to stop by and saw that we didn't have it up, everyone down the line would be punished. So we were obligated to do so. Customers didn't like these marketing techniques, and we would lose business as a result of people walking when they realized what was going on. That being said, there was certainly a reason why we were obligated to do this. Certain policies would have been protecting the company from libel, and certain processes may have simply been experiments to see how certain actions would affect sales. In the example of, say, OSHA regulations, there are certain regulations that need to be met that exist because someone was harmed in the past. An individual worker may be capable of ignoring regulation and having no harm come from it, but the regulation exists because in one case a person was harmed. My personal belief is that if the reason is not obvious or made apparent to those who are expected to follow it, then there should be gray area in enforcing those regulations. In math class, you have to show your work because if you get the right answer without showing your work, the teacher doesn't know if you found the right answer using a legitimate means. You could have cheated, you could have got the answer from a friend, you could have just guessed and got it right. And although typically you are rewarded for a correct answer, you're never going to get full credit unless you're able to explain how you found that correct answer. In these cases, the process is often more important than the end result. The teacher wants you to learn. They don't want you to get right answers on a test. The test is simply an avenue to check that the student has been learning. In the case of a test, however, the reason for showing your work is clearly explained. In a lot of cases with bureaucracy, the red tape that's put up and all of the regulations are not explained. It's negotiated in boardrooms among CEOs and lawyers and corporate high-ups who aren't speaking to the day-to-day worker. It's negotiated in boardrooms with lawyers and other people who will never experience the regulation themselves and don't see the negative effects that it has on day-to-day life of those who are beholden to the regulations. Furthermore, there's almost no leniency with policy, and wherever leniency is allowed, it varies from person to person. Someone who the boss likes will be able to get away with a hell of a lot more than someone who the boss dislikes. Although the worker bees are mostly affected by the rules, and the CEOs and the lawyers and those acting in boardrooms are usually not affected by the rules, the worker is also unaware of the importance of the rule. It's possible that something that they see as trivial, such as not following a script when speaking to a customer, could potentially subject the company at large to libel and bankruptcy, causing everyone to lose their job. It's expected that these higher-ups are more sensitive to the larger-scale problems that a company might face, and therefore they enact policy that affects the grand picture more than the day-to-day experience. Because people are self-interested and people make up a bureaucracy, it is to be expected that the bureaucracy will also be self-interested. So it will consider public relations in whatever calculation it makes in deciding policy. It's important to cover its ass where necessary, but the bureaucracy does stand to gain from allowing leniency wherever possible, given that consideration. When those outside the bureaucracy believe that it is serving itself to the detriment of those outside of it, public relations go down, and the bureaucracy loses in that regard. Therefore, there needs to be some amount of self-service, but also consideration for others. In protecting its own ass, the bureaucracy serves both those at the top of it and those at the bottom of it and everyone in between. The continuation of the bureaucracy serves all of those involved, whether that be a government body, allowing influence and power to even the smallest worker, or a company which provides the livelihood of all of those involved. When aligned properly with the morals of protecting others, not causing harm to others, and doing good through creation or otherwise, these bureaucracies benefit society at large. In practice, certain bureaucracies serve to the benefit of the highest members of the bureaucracy in a tyrannical sense and take advantage of those under them and those outside of the bureaucracy. In these cases, it's wrong, but it isn't wrong because it's a bureaucracy, it's wrong because it's causing harm. I'm most interested in this on a societal level, in regards to government bodies and in regards to large corporations. In government, we expect checks and balances in bureaucracy. We expect moral standards, the absence of bribery, the absence of exploitation, and I think the same should be expected of corporate bodies. Those at the top of bureaucracy should be expected to listen to and care for the needs of those beholden to the bureaucracy and those outside of it altogether. At the end of this thought experiment, I come to what I truly believe about my hypothetical moral code. Using these newly concrete beliefs, I establish a list of prescriptive ethics with which I will live my life by and would encourage anyone to live their own lives by. This list consists of: you should go out of your way to avoid harming others. You won't always be able to avoid harming others, but you should make an effort not to. You should go out of your way to the benefit of others. If you have 50 cents in your pocket and $50,000 in your bank account, that 50 cents in your pocket is going to mean a whole lot more good to the homeless man sitting on the street than it's going to mean to you. You should go out of your way to avoid harming yourself. On an airplane, they tell you to make sure you put your own oxygen mask on before you put on someone else's. It's important to make sure that your own ship isn't sinking before you start taking in passengers off of lifeboats. If you can't support yourself, then you have no obligation to support others. Be strong first and foremost, and then do what you can to help. You should make new things if you can. Go and create. Make a YouTube video of you singing a song. Write a book. Make an invention. Serve some need that society has or that you yourself has, because then others will benefit. You should repurpose old things if you can. No one loses when you're able to take something that's been forgotten and find a new use for it. You should combat exploitation where you see it. Although you aren't obligated to go significantly out of your way to stop exploitation, so long as you're not harming yourself to do so, you should in all cases combat it. Stand up for your coworker who's being taken advantage of by your boss. Boycott immoral businesses who are taking advantage of child labor to make cheaper goods. Stand up for the girl who's being pressured into sex by her boyfriend. You should go out of your way to find exploitation in order to combat it. If you suspect an instance of exploitation, especially in regards to yourself exploiting someone, you have a duty to pursue that further and see if this needs addressing. You should not steal from others. In the short term, theft benefits the individual doing the act, but in the long term, the unraveling of the social contract stands in detriment even to the thief. Society should serve its people. We cannot have authority figures serving their own personal interests to the detriment of society at large. If the society does not serve its people, then there is no need for society at all. Society should provide for those who cannot provide for themselves. In the United States, we have a surplus of goods. We have a surplus of food. We have a surplus of water. We have a surplus of housing. We have a surplus of clothing. We have a surplus of jobs. There's no reason why we shouldn't come together as a society and make certain that everyone is provided for, that every individual has their basic human needs met. Society should forgive and rehabilitate people who commit crimes. There must be consequences for bad actors, but there must also be a process of rehabilitation and forgiveness for those who have shown remorse for their misdeeds. In some cases, life in prison is the only acceptable outcome based on the severity of the crime committed, but in no cases is the death penalty justifiable or advantageous for society at large. We can rehabilitate people serving life sentences such that they are able to contribute positively to society, even from within a cell. Society should hold all of its members to the same standards. No one person can be above the law. A law is only a law if it applies to everyone equally. When laws are applied unequally, this undermines the social fabric. Certain positions of authority may be granted special permissions that a regular person wouldn't have, but people in these positions with these special privileges still need to act within the law that has been agreed upon by society. You should personally forgive those who harm you, but hold them accountable for their actions. When you forgive someone, you will start the healing process for yourself. When you forgive someone, you might start the healing process for them and help them change their ways. That being said, someone who never receives consequences for their actions will never learn from their mistakes. Those in power should listen to those they lead and make adjustments to meet their needs. A leader that ignores their constituents is immoral. Just like the purpose of society is to serve its people, the purpose of the leader is to serve its subjects. In order to best serve their subjects, the leader must listen to and care for the needs, the desires, the wants of those who they are leading. You should cooperate with those who share your moral goals. Although cooperation in and of itself is not a moral good, two individuals acting morally independently of each other will cause less good than if they were to come together and act morally together and cooperate in their moral goals. You should always avoid lying unless it benefits all parties involved. A lie that only stands to benefit one party is unjustifiable because of the harm that it causes to the other parties involved. The degree to which the lie benefits all parties involved should be considered in determining how justifiable the lie is. Furthermore, simply benefiting all parties does not justify a lie in and of itself, because of the importance of establishing trust. You should submit to just authority in order to uphold the social fabric. An unjust authority that is not serving its constituents is not worthy of being upheld. However, you must submit to a just authority that is serving its constituents, or else society itself will fall apart. And lastly, you should encourage others to be moral individuals. You can never force a person to be moral, but you can live by example. Uphold your own moral values, live a good life, and encourage other people to do so as well. Among friends and family and loved ones, you will have more sway than among strangers, and you must hold yourself to the same standards and live by example, because the persuasion of a hypocrite holds zero weight. I will live my life in accordance to these ethics and would encourage anyone watching to do the same. Be the change you want to see in the world. Do random acts of kindness. If everyone else does the same, the world will be a far better place for its inhabitants. Thanks for watching, and if you have anything that you'd like to express as a moral value you hold, please go ahead and leave that in the comments, and I'll respond to them as I see them.